Family in New York City. I've heard of it happen before, especially this time of the year, where the trash collectors decide to go on strike. Can you imagine? And all that stuff just collects out by the street. Well, there was one New York fellow that outsmarted them. It was Christmas time and the trash was collecting out there. Frank Mullen was his name. And he decided to take some of those trash bags and he put ribbons on them and make them look like gift bags, like Christmas gifts. And he put them in the back of his car, and he drove his car to a particular place, and he left his car unlocked. And you know the rest of the story, don't you? He had somebody else take out his trash. And can you imagine their surprise when they take what they thought was a gift in the back of the car home? Honey, look what I got for you. Oh my. Today we hear about somebody by the name of Jude, who you probably have not heard of before. I certainly have never spoke about him before. He was a half-brother of Jesus, and he wrote, Jesus did have brothers and sisters, half-brothers and sisters, that were younger than him, from Mary and Joseph. Jude happened to be one of those. He wrote what is the smallest, shortest letter in the New Testament, 24 verses. And it's right at the very end to the book of Revelation is what comes right after that. So what does this have to do with trash? Well, Jude, his singular focus in this very, very short letter is taking the trash out. The church, so early on, had already started having some divisions and disunity, and so he's taking the trash out, calling it what it is, and maybe even doing some trash talk. If you listen very carefully to what he says in there, he says disunity happens and brokenness happens in the church, and he calls it out. He says it's because shepherds are more concerned about taking care of themselves than they are about taking care of their flock. And he uses some interesting language. He talks about being uprooted, and he talks about those who cause this to be twice dead and tossed around like the waves of the sea. If he was a country boy, he might have said something like this: the ones who start stuff like that are as low as a snake belly in a wagon wheel rut, you know? What he was saying was just calling out what was going on. Maybe it was 10, maybe 20 years after Easter, and they're already starting to have divisions and arguments in the church. He's just calling it out. What causes that? What causes disunity in the church? I bet you every single person here can think of some church. Maybe you came from a church that was having arguments and disunity and quarrels and problems. As human beings, that's going to happen. I had a dear friend of mine that put it this way. He said it's when we break the first commandment most of all, and that is to not have any other gods. We make other things like idols, if you will. And he said we hold on to those things that we need to let go. Sacred cows, if you will, we give them way too much priority, and it causes divisions. There's a lot of truth to that. It's a true story that took place in Darlington, Maryland. A mother of 8 children decided to take a break, and she walked across the street, and she was talking with her neighbor. And all of a sudden, she noticed that it was very, very quiet on the other side of the street. And so she looked over there, and all 8 of her kids were in a circle in the front yard, huddled down, looking at something. Well, Mom was very, very curious about this, so she walked across the street and peered in to see what was going on. And there were 5 baby skunks that the kids were looking at. And of course, Mom did what any mom would do. She said, "Kids, run!" And they ran, but not before 5 of them picked up the skunks and took them with them home. Sometimes there are things we need to just let go of and focus on what really matters. Because the church over the years has done what we do as humans sometimes. And we focus on those things that really aren't that important. We focus on the gift instead of the hand and the heart of the giver behind it. Just for instance, think of sacraments, communion and baptism. Of all the things that might divide the church, these marvelous gifts from God, from the great giver, our Heavenly Father who says, I just want my kids to know in the waters of baptism that they are my very own, in communion that I'm present with them through the whole journey of life. And yet over the years, we argue and we divide over the gift, and we lose focus on the giver. Who gets to take it, how they get to take it, when they get to take it. Jesus didn't say take and understand. He said take and eat. We just celebrated the Reformation, the anniversary, 500th anniversary of that. And part of what that was about too was the church and God's people losing focus. And there was all kind of division and disunity because they were focusing on things like holy relics and holy places instead of the giver of all these things. How does that fit into this letter from Jude? Well, Jude talks about an interesting instance. And it's so interesting because he assumes that his readers are going to understand exactly what he's talking about. And what he's talking about is an apocryphal story about Moses. Now, Moses, you have to understand, was just the greatest spiritual figure that there was in the Old Testament, hands down. The Jewish people would say that he was the greatest leader, amazing, as close to God as anybody they could imagine. But in this story, the archangel Michael and Satan get in an argument, and a fight, literally, over who gets the body of Moses. The archangel Michael wins, but he doesn't get the body, so to speak. What's going on? Well, what's going on is this, is that we have such a tendency to make temples and shrines and to worship things instead of worship God. That for Michael to win means there is no shrine. So if you ever go to the Holy Land, somebody in Israel takes you to the burial place of Moses, don't let them charge anything to see it, okay? Because there is no such thing. Because God knows we just don't handle that very well. Well, what does that have to do with Advent? Oh, everything. Because we can focus on the gifts and not on the giver. And if in these services Wednesday night, if we do anything at all, let's take time to focus on the wonder and the mystery and the awe of our Heavenly Father and His great love. If you understand the sacraments, communion and baptism, please explain them to me sometime. It's a mystery, isn't it? In the 21st verse of Jude, Jude says, be sure to get caught up in the love of God. I love that. If you can explain love to me, do that too, will you? And especially if you can explain God's love. It's a mystery, isn't it? It's a wonder just to sit back and get caught up in it. And you know something? Mary really got that. At the Annunciation, when the angel comes and tells Mary, you will bring God's Son into this world, Mary doesn't say, oh, give me the details. I want to know what to do, when to do, how it's going to happen. She falls on her face, tears coming down her cheeks, and she is absolutely amazed in wonder and awe. Luke writes that she pondered all these things in her heart. This Advent, take time to just sit back in the wonder and the majesty of God and let Him write His love, a picture of His love on your hearts, just like this.